Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm editor of Car Dealer Magazine, and thank you for joining me for our next panel, which is called What New Technology Should You Be Implementing at Your Dealership? We're going to be talking to some businesses that you might not have heard of, some that you will probably recognize. Their products are changing, though, and the way car sales is changing, too. So they're going to explain a little bit about how what they're doing is implemented in the market. Please put your hands together for my three panelists. Hello. So I'm going to do this in a bit of a different way if you have been here already. Next to me, I've got Matt, Russell, and Craig on the end there. But I'm going to ask them just to explain a bit about what they do because they're kind of complicated and I don't think I can explain it myself. So Matt Caudle from Drover. Can you explain what Drover is and how it works?
Sure, no problem at all. So what Drover do, we are a car subscription marketplace, where on the demand side we provide customers with the option to get a car on a monthly basis inclusive of insurance, breakdown cover, the vehicle and fuel in one single monthly price, and then have the ability to switch and move between vehicles so they can really find the car that they want. And then on the supply side, we work with vehicle partners such as car dealerships, OEMs, leasing companies, a way for them to monetize basically idle stock. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
How did that come about?
It came about because we were looking at kind of the way ownership is going to change in the next kind of 5 to 10 years. And we thought that kind of traditional ownership models where individuals own their cars isn't necessarily always the best option. We think fleet partners with the ability, with their bigger balance sheets, the ability to manage and service cars, makes them a lot better asset owners. And especially with the world of autonomous cars, EVs, where there's a lot more uncertainty around what business models work, we believe they were the better owner of the asset.
It's funny because it's one of those things that seems so simple, but doesn't really happen at the moment. So it makes a lot of sense. Russell Danks we've got from the Future Factory London. Can you explain what that is? It's a nice broad title.
It is a nice broad title. That's why I like to keep it like that. I think, I set my business up about 12 months ago now, helping old businesses and old industries in particular identify where potential disruption is in the future and identify where the challenges and risks are there, and then help businesses create strategies to get there. So I think technology is always a facilitator of change. It's not the primary driver of change. It's how consumers and employees interact with that technology that ultimately changes that behavior. So for us, it's about helping businesses identify where those opportunities and risks are, create strategies to get there, and make it happen quick.
Cool. And on the end, we've got Craig Judson from Codeweavers.
Hello.
So you're a brand people know, but you are always developing new stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've got going on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we're a software provider for the motor industry, been around 15 years now. I originally started off by providing software for finance and making finance easier for the motor trade, really, presenting that on the websites. It's grown into interconnecting various systems that a dealer will use, and manufacturers and lenders, connecting these people together to make life easier, basically.
Cool. So if you guys have any questions for our panelists, please do just wave your hand and I'll try and see you and direct someone over with a microphone. But to all of you, where do you see the industry heading? You can jump in with whatever response you want.
Start with the futurists.
That's broad. I think there's two things. I think what's interesting is I generally work in the retail and kind of hospitality sector, and I think when you look at it, there's an awful lot of disruption happening in that space. 2018, I think, will be a record year for disruption. When you look at some of the older retailers that are particularly struggling in a new age, and I think that's not just a digital age, but it's just a change in how consumers are interacting with society. And I think for the automotive industry in particular, I think what's going to be interesting is, these guys will talk to you about the digital journey and how that's changing. But for me, I think the biggest thing that's on the horizon is looking at how the changes in ownership structure are going to be really quite big in the future. And what I mean by that is that view of owning a car has naturally changed over the last few years anyway, through lease plans, etc. But actually, that view of not owning a car is quite interesting. So I spoke in my workshop earlier. This year, I've taken a bit of a journey in the fact that I had a company car for the last 16 years. I have just got rid of it. And this year, I thought I would make a view of seeing if I could just get by using Zipcar and Drivy. And so far, I'm saving about 200 quid a month. And I'm driving around in Range Rovers and Volkswagen Polos. So it's about, I think a lot of it is just about just as much a psychological change as it is as a change in the way people consume cars generally.
I mean, this has come largely, I would say, you can disagree with me, from the financing side and from people, the way people buy cars, monthly payments, and they're less attached to it now. Would you agree with that?
I think I'd like to jump in there, definitely. People are, finance is an important part, right? It's all about monthlies, and we can't afford to buy a 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 pound car straight off the bat, and people see it in that way. And I think the industry has got we're in a strong place to bat off people like Amazon and the big boys, because they're all about buying things straight off. They're all about looking at that advert price and just paying it. They're not thinking about all these processes that are behind the scenes. And there's a load of processes there, from finance, from delivery, from part exchange. So the industry's got a great position to say, well, how can we make this the future and leapfrog the likes of Amazon? And because they're trying to tackle this problem actively, and they struggle time and time again. And I think if we get together, we can actually look at the systems that are out there, interconnect these systems, and have something quite powerful for people. And that might lead into new products like sharing schemes and various other channels. I don't think anyone will take over the complete, we're all going to be sharing cars, but I think it'll be an important channel. But I think having the variety there for customers is what they're after now.
Why do you think we are kind of less attached to owning something so big as a car?
I think, obviously the invention of the smartphone, changes of all kind of products we purchase, mobile phones, even the way you access media content through the likes of Netflix. People are beginning to get introduced to these new concepts and ideas through the products and services they use across not just their automotive and retail, but across everything they buy and purchase. And I think the customers are starting to get used to that, liking the additional flexibility you get, liking the lack of hassle, the risk that you take on, and so looking for less kind of ownership ways, I think, is that's the reason why.
So with Drover, how long can you own a car for?
So the minimum term is a monthly rolling contract where you pay £400 monthly rolling price, and then you can commit to up to a year, and then you'll get a discount incentive basically for committing to a longer term.
I know you're a relatively young company, but are you seeing any trends in what people are opting for at the moment?
It's a real mix. The demographic is a lot younger than traditional, so I heard earlier today it's 55 is the average car buyer. With us, it's below the age of 35. We're seeing a lot more women using the platform, and it's a real mix. Some people are really liking to switch between, always wanted to drive a Range Rover 3 months, never had the money to be able to do it, and then they're getting into the subscription, only a 3-month commitment, and then enjoying it. Whereas somebody wants a kind of more budget-orientated vehicle because they've just had a new kid, and then we're finding companies, so executives who are over here for, say, a 6-month, 12-month period don't necessarily want to fully commit to a car, and they don't have many company car options, and so they're driving a relatively nice vehicle for that period of time.
Are there any other ways that you guys think car dealers can make the car buying experience more convenient for customers?
I'll let you into a recent example that I had, actually. So before I went on this journey of going carless, I thought I'd buy a car. I won't name the manufacturer, but anyway, went to the manufacturer's website, looked really good, interacted with it, and put through my details. The next thing I know, I get a phone call really quickly, to be fair, and promptly, but I've been kind of lured in by the marketing, right? So the marketing team have done a good job. The dealership is an hour away from my house. Hang on, sorry, you want me to drive an hour? You want me to come an hour to your dealership? Yeah, we would like to come for an hour, but we'll book you an appointment. Great. Hang on a second. I don't want to drive an hour. I'm just on the cusp of a millennial, right? And the whole point of that is the fact that you come to me, services come to me, you rotate around me, you know me, and you should be able to personalize it to me. And I think what was really interesting was just this conversation of this dealership wanting me to drive an hour out of my way to go and see you. And when I said, I think you're a bit too far away, that was it, the end of the conversation. End of the conversation, that was it. Then the manufacturer rang me 3 times to ask me how my experience was. Well, if you'd known about it, it wasn't great, because actually I didn't get to experience it. So I think very much around how you can personalize it to people. How do you bring that service to people? I think we already start to see it with some dealerships in shopping centers, etc. That's a good, interesting foray into that. But I think it's that, how do you bring those services to people? If I look at Purple Bricks, for example, on estate agents, even just that is a good example. I come to you, I come to your house and speak to you. And I think there is a real mindset change. You know, that view that I want to go and speak to a specific person in a specific dealership may apply to some people, but not everybody.
Do you have any predictions about how that would actually be physically possible with car sales, though? Because driving cars out to people isn't necessarily the best option for a car dealership.
That's the key thing. It's not the best option for the car dealership. And that's the thing, is any service, and you can look at it across the board. So I use the example of Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster finally closed its last store this year. I think they just finally wrote to Iceland and told them that they'd closed. But it's a really good example of which is if you're having to drive to a service or a provider, and you're having to make that journey, then the key thing is that you are ripe for disruption.
I completely agree.
Sorry, it's also I think it's also making providing tools that are easier for a customer to see what the best vehicle is for them. And at the moment, I think we're quite weak on what we're providing customers for quite a big purchase. There's many options out there: new cars, new stock vehicles, used vehicles. Very rarely you see them together, but they can be packaged up like the same package as a new car. And I think providing tools that understand the customer better, the behaviours of what they're doing on the website, to tapping into some of the sales process online, we're really poor at doing that. And providing tools to do that, I think, is a key.
Because we are like the comparison generation, aren't we? We want to see everything all at once. So how do we get there?
Oh, there are many ways and top secret projects, I'm sure, that are going on everywhere to try and solve this. And I think the key is just to look at patterns of behaviour. For me personally, I think artificial intelligence is it's a buzzword that gets thrown about and a lot. It's not cyborgs or anything like that, but it's the idea of looking at deep patterns that are in things and how can that help us decide the process. So daily we've got people coming onto the shop floor buying vehicles. How can we analyse that data and figure out what the patterns are? What are we doing daily? What's the interactions with people? And how can we look at applying that on the web or collecting the data we need to interpret that?
This is all a little bit
Sorry,
over my
I'm
head,
usually
but
tech
no,
conference.
no, it's interesting. But I'm trying to think of an interesting next question to actually follow up to something like that. So you're here with Trustpilot. What are you talking about there?
So specifically looking at how, it's funny because I work with a pub group as well, and there's a lot of similarities because if you think about it, I work with a pub group that says the relationship is with the landlord, and when I go in, I want to have a conversation with the landlord about my day and then buy a pint. Does that resonate with anybody?
I never want to have a conversation.
Last night.
Yeah. I mean, on a Saturday night, I just want to go in and get served quickly. And I think it's interesting in terms of that belief that some people do want a relationship with those people. Other people want to operate in a digital world. And so, for example, I prefer to go to a self-service checkout versus a checkout that has a manned person there, just because I hate talking to people. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I generally just hate talking to other people. And I think what's interesting is, from a digital space, is the Trustpilot element's really interesting, because again, it's about how do you build an element of trust within the whole kind of sphere of digital. And I think, certainly for millennials, 52% of millennials will say to you that actually they don't believe expert reviews. They believe they're funded or self-funded. And I think actually you're much more likely to believe a peer review. Now, of course, that comes with its own connotations for the future, I'm pretty sure. But actually, I think it's quite interesting in terms of how people see that build of trust and build that window of trust in a digital space just as much as a physical space as well.
How does that play out for you when you're renting cars to people from loads of different dealerships? Is it quite a high-risk space to be in, that things could go wrong, particularly in the used car market? Will that come back on you, or is it completely white-labelled?
So for us, we're always, as any business, new business, we're very customer-focused and making sure every point or interaction with us is, they always have a fantastic experience. There's different ways you can do it. So we obviously use, peer-based review sites to make sure that, we're performing well, and then we have an internal rating system, as with any marketplace, to make sure that our partners are providing the quality service that they need to provide. You're looking at innovations around telematics, insurance, and integrating that with the whole kind of with used cars as well. You can get quite clever at predicting when vehicles are more likely to have an issue versus which vehicles are the better performing over a kind of a 5-year life cycle. So
I think the reason most people are here is they want to know how can they actually make money out of Drover? How does that work?
It's very simple. I get that question asked. It's normally the first question that I get asked by any car dealer CEO. How do I make any money out of this? I think there's kind of two ways you can really do it. One is obviously looking at any available idle stock that you have sitting on your forecourt, whether that be pre-reg used cars. You've got 50 cars that you're just really struggling to shift this month, it's a really, really easy way to upload it on the system. There's no hassle, no commitment. Somebody comes to you, picks it up, drops it off 3 months later. We work with you. You set the pricing on the vehicle, on the money or return that you want to make on it. Because of the flexibility in the solution, there is a premium that customers are willing to pay for the service, so you can make your money up like that. And what we find after, say, we've worked with somebody for 6, 12 months, they go, actually, this is really working for us, we really want to expand. They then actually start working with us to identify which specific vehicles they want to bring in and which ones to buy, and then we advise you, this car will do very well at this rate, does that work for you? And then they sometimes bring in the additional stock. Great one for car dealers are ones with existing rental businesses or ones who have or considering a rental business. It's a good way of also generating used vehicle stock. So if they want to kind of bring in pre-reg vehicles, monetize them for 12 months, and then move them onto their used car network, that works quite well as well. Looking from a car dealer side, it's one of those things that seems like way too good to be true. Oh, I've got all this stock, I can rent it out and make more money. But yeah, it does seem like a really, really good option.
There's probably other ways as well. I mean, the data you collect from people trying these vehicles out and sharing them, that's value to the dealer as well. You know, what cars are you buying? You want them to get in cars. You want to see them driving because you want them to have a good experience when they're actually purchasing or owning a car. And I think that's a good option into to kind of the owner model.
Definitely, we say especially like EVs is still a small segment, but a growing segment, and it's a great opportunity for somebody to have say a BMW i3 for 3-6 months, and then if they have a great experience, then they can then be you can then potentially sell them a vehicle. So it's obviously a channel to make money using the cars, so making money off your demonstrator fleet essentially, but also a way to upsell to customers, and because you've been that dealer who's provided them that great experience using a car subscription, you can then sell them a car later on.
Sorry, that was really badly timed. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about the future of the physical dealership. What do you guys think about whether we will still have dealerships in the traditional sense in 5-10 years?
That's a good question. I think if you look at retail as a good example of that, if we look at, I don't know, take John Lewis and Waitrose as a really good example. The reality is there will be some people that still want to physically go and see, touch, feel, and have a conversation with somebody. That's still going to be there. Do I think there's going to be the same amount of dealers? No, I don't think there will be. I think that's inevitable. But what's interesting is it fits into two camps. You're either built for convenience, and therefore it's a frictionless transaction that actually is about convenience and time saving. So actually, you know, Drover's a really good example of that, I think, of kind of that convenience. I take out a lot of that hassle of doing all those individual counterparts. Or you're built for experience. And I think that's the key part, is actually people are looking to be not only immersed in both the car that I'm buying, but actually the brand that I'm buying into. And I call it 4D retailing, actually, in terms of looking at those things that go beyond just the purchase itself, but actually the brand that I'm buying into, it goes much deeper than that. And I think if you look at Tesla as a good example, and, you know, whilst they might not be making a lot of money right now, what's interesting is they are very much building a huge brand interpretation in terms of that. I immerse you in the brand. The car choice comes secondary to the actual brand. Liken it to Apple as a good example.
Great.
Yeah, completely agree. There was some talks earlier on about Amazon and about being a marketplace, and I think one thing to remember is Amazon don't sell all the products that are on there. You know, it's a marketplace of retailers, and I think the same is true for the dealer network. You're going to have dealerships, you're going to have dealer presence, you're going to have identities that are local to people, and even if Amazon were to come into this industry, it does not eliminate that need for local presence.
No, I agree. I think you know, I agree with what's been said so far. I think car dealership have some really strong USPs in the space, even as it changes. I think great geographic coverage, focus on after sales and maintaining vehicles. These are not easy or hard, easy things and expensive things to do. And if you can really focus on providing a great customer experience, either that's through selling your own cars or getting other providers to sell your cars on your behalf, I think you have a kind of a good foundation to keep going.
So would you say that customer service is should be the core of any business, and we're kind of moving away from this sales-driven image that consumers still have?
Totally, and I think it could actually be there's more dealerships in the future, but they're just smaller and more spread out, more in towns, more better located, rather than being on the suburbs of a town. Like
having your own concierge service. So if you were going to make one big prediction for the next 5 years, what would you say? For the automotive industry, that is, not just generally anything.
The good thing is none of you will remember this in 5 years' time, right? So or
We
whatever
are
we
filming
say.
it.
I think what we'll see is utilization of cars in particular. So whether that's the stock that you've got pre-selling it or post-selling it. And for me, if I look at the changes in the way people own things is a really good example. So look at the rise of Airbnb. And of course, hotels still exist alongside Airbnb. But if I look at people like Drivy that will come along and say, well, actually, it's the Airbnb for cars. And someone said to me yesterday, I don't feel comfortable giving my car out to somebody. Yet you'll let them sleep in your bed, in your sheets. It's an interesting, kind of concept in terms of getting people's heads around the fact that this is an asset to be used, and therefore, how do I get the most out of it? I think what will happen is we'll just start to see the utilization a lot more, both pre and post sale. I think.
I'm just going to jump in really quickly, but there's a website called Book a Classic as well, and I just think a classic car is something prized that people don't really want to have people even touching, but there is this market where people are willing to rent them out, let other people enjoy them, and make money off the back of it. Sorry, do jump in.
That's fine. In terms of next 5 years, I think there's a lot of talk about autonomous cars, electric cars. I think in 5 years, and we're quite clear on what it could look like in the future, but it's all very complicated and complex. And so I think in 5 years' time, we may be in a similar position where we are now. We'll have learned a lot of lessons and tried new things, but I think it's still quite a lot of uncertainty, and I think probably won't move as quickly as some media publications would imply. I think I've read that autonomous cars will be here by 2030, and you look around London and you go, wow, I couldn't see autonomous cars driving around here. So I think I think there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of movement, consolidation, maybe in the OEMs, different players emerging. But it will still be very messy. I think.
What do you think, Craig?
5 years. In 5 years' time, I think we'll be harnessing data out of cars a lot better. I think manufacturers will be using that as a source of income in 5 years' time. And linked to the utilisation, because there'll be less cars on the road. So manufacturers, as a need for necessity, will have to find value elsewhere in vehicles. So we'll be utilising cars more, we'll be getting more data out of the cars and harnessing that data for ultimately marketing advertising back into reselling that to Google, most likely.
And we just touched on EVs, but what impact are they having on the market?
I think it's still very small currently. If you look at the charging infrastructure in place, I think if everybody moved to EVs tomorrow, I don't think the power networks would be able to handle it. That said, obviously, with the change in government legislation, by 2040, everything's going to be EV, hydrogen. I think people are starting to move. There's been, I think, EV products in the market since early 2010s, but it's still slow. But I think it's going to probably come more into focus in the next 5 years.
Would you two add anything on that?
I'm super excited about electric, not just because of the fact it's electric. It's because with it brings new technology, new way of working. It's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, and that's already happening. So I think that's an awesome experience for a technology company to provide tools in that world. But yeah, I think it's looking good. And also with the policies that are coming out from governments, it's a no-brainer. It's going to have to go that way, unless hydrogen picks up. But.
I think I don't have a particular view on the EV market, but I think the one thing I would say is that whilst we talk about change as being inevitable, what's interesting, I think, at the moment is just we talk about the pace of change just being quicker than before, and I think that willing to adopt is really interesting. So those adoption cycles, when I was at university, you were learning a Boston matrix curve of 10 years, and now we're talking of 2.5 years. So those curve cycles are just quicker than ever before. So I think whilst we might see it slow to grow, I think there will be a fundamental shift, and it may maybe in the next 5 years, I don't know, there may be something better that comes along, but I think what we will do is see that adoption just quicker than we've probably seen before.
No, just to add there, I think the EV technology, I think people think it's like EVs is the only way to go. I think we'll probably find a future where EVs are great in certain locations like cities, but if you look at long distance driving, even with trucks and things like that, like the EV technology is still far, far away, so you may end up in a multimodal world where different types of fuel are used for different business purposes, just adding to the complexity, but yeah.
Definitely. It's definitely a very turbulent time full of change. That's all we have time for, but if you guys have any more questions for our trio panelists, they are out on the stands, so do go and find them and have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.